Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about a few interesting topics while I pack customer orders. I was so excited because I received quite a few orders in a short period of time and somehow a couple of clips didn't get recorded. Maybe I forgot to press the record button properly. Likely I was filming from another angle as well because I always create content for social media while I work. I hope this video will be helpful for beginner candle makers, especially if you're in your first year of business. I know how challenging that stage can be and how many different things you're trying to figure out at once. In this video, I'll talk about how to price your orders. Pricing isn't based on what you think a product should cost, and it's not something you should decide just because another candle maker is charging a certain price. I'll show you how I personally price my candles and explain the formula I use for my 3-ounce candles. I'll also share some ideas on how you can lower your cost of goods now and think ahead for the future because costs definitely change over time. And finally, I'll talk about a few things I regret from my last 3.5 years of running my small candle business. Hopefully, my experience can give you a realistic picture of what this business looks like and maybe help you to avoid some of the mistakes I made in the beginning. So let's get started. One of the most popular products in my shop is my 3-ounce amber candle. It's small but not too small. It gives a good sun throw and can easily fill a room with fragrance. I think customers really like this size because it's affordable, easy to ship, and a great way to try a new scent without committing to a large candle. When I started working on my pricing 3 years ago, I didn't have AI tools or ChatGPT to help me. Everything was done manually. I simply took a notebook and wrote down every single material that goes into making one candle. But how do you know how much each material costs for just one candle? It's actually very simple. Let's say you're buying 100 jars and they cost $100. To find the cost of one jar, you simply divide the total cost by the number of jars. In this example, one jar costs $1. You can do exactly the same things with lids, wick stickers, labels, or any other supplies. For wax, let's say you buy 5 kilograms of wax for $20. 5 kilograms is 5,000 grams. If you need for one candle 50 grams of wax, you divide $20 by 5,000 and then multiply by 50. That tells you exactly how much wax costs for one candle. You can use the same method for fragrance oils as well. Now I'll show you my own example. For one of my 3-ounce amber candles, my wax costs about $1.24. My fragrance oil is around 82 cents. It's based on the average fragrance load that I use, which is about 8%. My wick is 18 cents. My jar and lid together cost $1.48. The label is 25 cents. Wick stickers about 7 cents. And the warning label costs another 25 cents. When I add everything together, my average cost of goods is around $4.30 to $4.50 per candle. What I usually do is take that number and multiply it by 4. If possible, you can add another 10 to 20% on top of that. In my case, that's difficult because my supply costs are already quite high. I buy materials from different countries and shipping costs a lot of money. But even if you multiply your cost of goods by 4, you can still build a profitable business while keeping your prices reasonable. Now let's talk about shipping. Shipping has become expensive for the last few years. In my country, it cost me around $23. That's a lot of money. Because of that, I didn't really want customers to see $23 shipping fee at checkout, even if it's the real cost. So what I do is add about $3.50 from the shipping cost into the price of each candle. That helps cover part of the shipping expense before the customer even reaches checkout. Then I use different shipping rates on my website depending on the order value. This encourages customers to add more items to their cart. If they're buying several products, they're helping me cover more of the shipping costs as well. And even if there are still a few dollars left for me to cover, it's usually not a big problem because the order is still profitable. These are the kind of small details that you'll need to adjust to your own business and your own situation. Using this pricing method, and my candles are priced at around $20 to $21 each. Personally, I think that's a fair and reasonable price for a handmade candle. At the end of the day, if you have a strong brand story, create quality products, and build a real connection with your customers, you're offering much more than just a candle. There are brands selling candles for hundreds of dollars, and sometimes there's nothing particularly special about the product itself. That's why it's so important to understand who your ideal customer is and who you're creating your products for. The better you understand your audience, the easier it becomes to price your products with confidence. Now let's talk about cost of goods and how it can change over time. I think this one is the biggest mistakes many beginner candle makers make. A lot of people assume that the best way to lower their cost of goods is to buy everything in huge quantities right away, but in reality, it's not always the smartest decision. I want to share a mistake that I made when I first started my business. Before I launched my website, I thought I need to buy a large amount of supplies because I believed it would lower my costs and help me to make more profit in the future. What I didn't realize was that the cost of goods wouldn't stay the same forever, and more importantly, I didn't know how many products I would actually sell. When you're just starting out, you usually don't have a lot of orders. Maybe you'll get 1 or 2 orders every week or even every couple of weeks. Because of that, it's important to think carefully about the materials you're buying. If supplies sit on your shelves for too long, they may not perform the same way they did when they were fresh. For example, before I even opened my website, I was buying 60-ounce bottles of fragrance oils. Looking back, that was way too much. At that stage, I had no idea how many orders I would receive or which fragrances customers would actually like. Fragrance oils don't last forever. Depending on the oil, it may take 1, 2, or 3 years before it starts changing. Sometimes the scent becomes weaker, sometimes the hot throw isn't as strong as before, and sometimes the fragrance doesn't perform the same way in your candles. That's why I recommend buying reasonable quantities, especially during your first year in your business. Try to purchase amounts that you realistically think you'll use within the next year. That way, you're always working with fresh materials that perform properly and help you create the best possible products for your customers. The same goes for buying too many different fragrance oils. When you're starting out, you want to buy every fragrance oil that sounds interesting, but many of those oils may end up sitting on your shelves. You might never have enough time to test all of them, and some fragrances may not fit your collections or your brand. Eventually, some of those oils may expire before you had a chance to use them, and that's money lost. Of course, you can still make fragrances with older fragrance oils, but you never know exactly how they will perform once they reach your customers. You're taking a risk, and that could lead to disappointing results, customer complaints, or negative reviews. The same idea applies to wax. Wax can usually be stored for a long time and still remain in good condition, but if you're working from a small apartment or a small studio, buying huge pallets of wax may not make much sense. First, you'll need somewhere to store it all, and second, if you're in your first year of business, it's unlikely that you'll use all of that wax anytime soon. Some of those supplies could easily sit with you for 2 or even 3 years before they're used. So my advice is simple. Buy a reasonable amount of materials, enough to keep your business running smoothly while still allowing you to make a profit. As your business grows, you'll start to understand how many sales you will get. You'll know which products sell best, which fragrance customers love, and how often you need to restock. Once you reach that stage and start receiving more consistent orders, you can gradually buy larger quantities of supplies. That's when lowering your cost of goods makes much more sense because you know those materials will actually be used. In the beginning, focus on staying flexible, keeping your inventory fresh, and learning what works for your business. Now let's get to the most interesting part of this video. I want to share my experience after 3.5 years of running my candle business because I feel like there are a lot of things people don't talk about when they tell you to start a candle business. One of the first things I wish someone had told me is how much money you actually spend when you're building a business. It's funny because you'll see so many videos on YouTube saying things like start a candle business with $100 or start a candle business on a small budget. And while technically you can start making candles with a small amount of money, running a real business is a completely different story. The product itself isn't the expensive part. What becomes expensive is everything around it. You're not just making candles in your kitchen or in a small studio. You're building a website, providing customer service, paying taxes, paying business expenses, learning marketing, dealing with shipping, and solving problems every single day. If you're thinking about starting a candle business and immediately quitting your job, I would be very careful with that decision. For most people, a small business isn't profitable right away. In fact, it can take years before it becomes stable enough to replace a regular income. Of course, every business is different. Some people grow faster than others. But if you're like me, learning everything as you go, it takes time. When I started, I didn't know what SEO was. I didn't understand how important keywords were. I didn't know that I would need to constantly talk about my products online, creating email campaigns, run advertisements, write blogs, and spend hours learning things I had never heard about before. And speaking of advertising, that's another reality nobody really talks about. Advertising is expensive. Nowadays, you can't really expect to get consistent results from running ads for $2 or $5 a day. At least in my experience, that's not enough anymore. You start testing with larger budgets, sometimes $20 a day, sometimes even more. And the hardest part is that you're spending money before you know if anything will work. It's not enough to post a beautiful product photo because there are thousands of beautiful product photos online. People scroll past them every day without even noticing. You have to create content that grabs attention. You have to test different videos, different hooks, different stories, different audiences. Some things work and some things don't. And every test costs money. That's one of the hardest part of running a small business. You're constantly investing before you see results. Before I launched my website, I honestly thought that once it was online, customers would somehow find it and start placing orders. I was excited and very optimistic. But what I didn't understand was that my website would become one website among millions of other websites on the internet. People don't magically find your store. You need good product descriptions, you need keywords, you need content, you need SEO, which is search engine optimization, and then sometimes it's still not enough. You can absolutely grow organically, but that takes a lot of time, sometimes years. And social media has changed so much over the last few years. Even if you work hard on your content, it's becoming harder and harder to be seen. Even if you're posting constantly, filming videos, editing content, and trying your best, there is no guarantee that people will see your work. Because of that, having a strong brand story is more important than ever. When someone discovers your business for the first time, they need a reason to stop scrolling. They need to understand who you are, why you started your business, and why your products are different. People don't just buy products. They buy from brands they connect with and from people they trust. Another thing I didn't realize when I started is that testing never really ends. I think many beginner candle makers believe that once they finish testing their first collection and launch their products, the testing phase is over, but that's not true at all. As long as you own a candle business, you'll continue testing. Every new fragrance oil, every new collection, every new product idea requires testing. And testing is expensive. You're using wax, fragrance oil, wicks, jars, labels, and your time. Sometimes a candle works perfectly and sometimes it doesn't work at all. Then you have to make another tester and another tester and another tester. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months before you're happy with the final product. And all of those test candles cost money. That's why my first piece of advice for anyone thinking about starting a candle business is simple. Don't quit your regular job too early. Even though it sounds like a small business, it still requires a lot of money to build and maintain. Let me give you an idea of some of the expenses I personally pay for. I pay for my Shopify subscription, which is around $300 per year. Then I pay for my website domain, which is $15 per year. I also pay for apps inside Shopify. For example, I use blogging app and it costs me around $25 per month. I pay for OmniSend, which costs around $16 per month. It helps me send emails, create pop-ups on my website, and stay connected with customers and subscribers. Because Shopify payments isn't available in my country, I also pay for a separate payment provider, which costs me around $30 each month. Then there are payment processing fees. If you're using PayPal, for example, you're paying a small fee from every order. It may only be $1 or $2, but when you have multiple orders, those fees add up quickly. I also pay for Canva Pro. Honestly, Canva Pro saves me so much time. I realized very quickly that finding good free graphics and design elements can take forever. Sometimes you spend hours searching and still don't find what you're looking for. For me, Canva Pro is worth the money because it helps me create labels, social media content, website graphics, and many other things much faster. That's another $15 per month. Then there are Meta ads. Right now, I spend around $20 per day on advertising. Just think about that for a moment. $20 every single day. And some days you might not get a single order. That's a scary part. But at the same time, if I stop advertising completely, my website traffic drops dramatically. Running ads can be stressful, but having no visitors on your website at all is stressful too. I also pay for Google Workspace, which gives me a professional email address connected to my domain. It makes the brand look more professional and helps reduce the chances of my emails ending up in spam folders. That's another $9 per month. And these are only business expenses. I'm not even including health insurance, personal bills, retirement savings, taxes, accounting services, and all the normal expenses of everyday life. So when people say that starting a candle business is cheap, I always smile a little bit because the reality is very different once you start running an actual business. Now let's talk about something else that surprised me. What do you actually do as a candle business owner? Because, spoiler alert, it's definitely not just making candles and shipping orders. Of course, you're the maker, you're making the candles, preparing the products, packing orders, and shipping them. But that's only one part of the job. You're also a copywriter because someone has to write all the emails, product descriptions, headlines, website content, and marketing messages. You're also a content creator. And honestly, this is one of the biggest parts of running a small business today. You need to film content, edit videos, show your face, talk about your products, share behind-the-scenes moments. Sometimes it feels like I'm running a candle business. Other times it feels like I'm a full-time blogger. And if I'm being honest, this part can sometimes be frustrating. There are days when all I want to do is quietly make candles and focus on creating products. Instead, I spend hours filming, editing, writing captions, creating content, and trying to come up with new ideas. Then Instagram shows the video to a few hundred people, and that's it. You have to be prepared for moments like that because they happen to everyone. You're also a photographer, whether you plan to be one or not. Hiring a professional photographer can be very expensive, especially when you're just starting out. Because of that, many small business owners end up learning product photography themselves. You need to learn how to make your product look attractive, how to use lighting, how to style photos, how to create images that look professional enough for your website and social media. The good news is that it's absolutely possible to learn. I learned most of it myself through YouTube videos, practice, and a lot of trial and error. Then there are ads. Running Meta ads is a job on its own. First, you have to learn how to set up everything. Then you need to understand audiences. You have to learn how to analyze the results, understand the data, and decide what to do next. Should you increase the budget? Should you change the video? It's a long-term game and there's always something new to learn. Then there are blogs. Writing blogs is another thing that's important for growing your website and helping people find your products through search engines. I'll be honest, this is probably one of the least favorite tasks. Even though I use ChatGPT to help me create blog posts, it still takes a lot of work. You won't simply copy and paste everything. You need to edit, rewrite sentences, add your own voice, remove things that don't sound natural, and make sure the article actually sounds human. Because of that, one blog post can easily take me 1 or 2 hours to finish. Do I enjoy it? Not really. Do I think it's important? Absolutely. The more quality content you have on your website, the more opportunities people have to discover your website. So what is the biggest advantage and the biggest disadvantage of owning a small candle business? For me, the biggest advantage is the feeling of creating something with your own hands and knowing that people genuinely enjoy it. There is something satisfying about reading a positive review from your customer. I also love the freedom. I'm my own boss. I decide what products I create, what direction I take my business, and how I spend my time. But The biggest disadvantage is the uncertainty. Unlike a regular job, there is no guarantee that you'll receive orders every day. Some days you wake up and see new orders waiting for you. Other days, there's nothing. And when your business is your main source of income, you start worrying about bills, expenses, and everything that needs to be paid. That's why I always tell people that running a small business requires patience. If you're looking for a guaranteed paycheck and immediate stability, a small business probably isn't the right path for you. So that's everything I wanted to share with you today. I wanted this video to be completely honest because I think social media often shows only the exciting side of running a small business. We see the success stories, the big launches, and the growing brands, but we don't always see the mistakes, the expenses, the stress, and the years of work happening behind the scenes. My goal wasn't to discourage anyone from starting a candle business. I just wanted to share the reality from my own experience after 3.5 years. If you're thinking about starting your own business, I hope this video helped you understand what to expect and what challenges you might face along the way. And if you already have a small business, I'd love to hear from you. What's something you regret or something you wish you had known when you first started? Let me know in the comments because I think it would be really interesting to hear different experiences from different business owners. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting my channel, and I'll see you in my next video.